night, I read a story sent by a traveler who followed a map into a place that should not exist. This is the account she left behind. I had crossed so many borders that month that the days began to blur together: airports, bus terminals, dim platforms. Each one felt like the fading echo of the last. When I stepped out of the final station that afternoon, the town before me looked like a place still deciding whether it wanted to exist. Quiet streets, closed windows, a kind of silence that settles before you even notice it. I wasn't planning to stay long. One night, maybe two, just enough to sleep, shower, and keep moving. My phone was almost empty, my legs heavier than my luggage, and the sky was already sliding toward early evening. I opened my booking app out of habit, more than intention. That was when I saw the hostel. The photos were old, washed out colors, peeling paint, a building that looked tired long before I would ever reach it. But the reviews were strangely positive, peaceful, quiet, perfect for one night. A cheap place with a good rating is all a solo traveler asks for. I didn't hesitate. I booked the room and let the map decide the rest. The route pushed me across the last stretch of town, past a row of faded houses, down a street that seemed to lose interest in being a street. My suitcase wheels scraped against rough pavement, as if complaining about every decision that brought me here. The final intersection had no traffic lights, no cars, no voices, just an arrow on my screen pointing forward, straight into the fields beyond the town. I paused, expecting the map to correct itself. It didn't. The red pin sat confidently in the middle of nothing. I should have turned back, but exhaustion makes choices smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. I kept walking. The pavement gave way to packed dirt, and the dirt thinned into a narrow track, winding between tall grass. The field seemed endless, bending gently in the wind, whispering in a language only distance can speak. My feet pressed deeper into the ground, as if each step asked permission to exist. The sun sank too quickly. One moment, it was above the horizon. The next, it was swallowed by clouds that had gathered without warning. The colors drained from the sky, leaving behind a smudged purple haze that swallowed the road ahead. I looked back at my screen. Continue straight. 700 meters. Arriving soon. The idea of arriving soon made me laugh under my breath. Only it didn't sound like my laugh. It was thin, restless, almost swallowed before it left my mouth. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or insects or the wheels of my suitcase. Something low, heavy, pressed into the earth rather than carried by the air. I stopped walking. The silence around me shifted, bending itself around whatever had moved. I turned my head slowly. Not all the way, just enough to see the line where the grass met the dimming sky. 4, maybe 5 shapes stood between the reeds, not walking, not talking, just present, watching me the way someone watches a door they expect to open. My hand tightened on the suitcase handle, but my feet began moving before I realized it. Not running. Running would make noise. Running would announce fear. Instead, I walked with the steady rhythm of someone pretending nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. Deeply, unmistakably wrong. The field behind me whispered again. Then the footsteps began. At first they were soft, almost polite, as if testing the weight of each step. But they grew closer, too close, and the pattern became unmistakable. They were matching me, pacing me, closing the distance in small, deliberate increments. I didn't turn around this time. Fear makes a person choose direction over understanding. Forward was the only answer. My suitcase jolted against a rock and flipped onto its side. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The path narrowed between the grass, funneling me deeper into the field. The wind rose suddenly, pushing the reeds aside just long enough for me to see shapes moving again. Closer, clearer, and no longer trying to hide, I dropped the second suitcase. My hand let go without asking permission. It thudded against the ground and rolled, but I was already several steps ahead. My breath came shallow, short, contained inside my chest like something trapped. The map pulsed. 400 meters, 300, 200. The numbers felt unreal, like a countdown I hadn't agreed to. And then I saw it. A silhouette in the distance, a structure rising where there should have been nothing. A building too still, too old, too quiet to belong to the world around it. The hostel, or whatever it was pretending to be. The footsteps behind me shifted, the pace changing, as if the men realized I had seen what they had driven me toward. I didn't know whether they wanted me inside that building or far from it. Both answers felt wrong. Both answers felt like decisions someone else had made long before I arrived. The sky dimmed completely. The first star appeared above me, cold, sharp, indifferent, and I walked toward the building because there was nowhere else left to go. I remember the moment I reached the edge of the worn concrete path, how the air felt different, thicker, more certain of itself, as if everything outside the building belonged to them, and everything inside belonged to something else. I stepped forward anyway, not because I wanted to, but because the field behind me was no longer empty, and the road in front of me was the only direction that didn't feel alive with footsteps. That was when I understood. I wasn't choosing safety. I was being pushed toward whatever waited in the dark. There was no turning back. I didn't wait to confirm whether the men behind me were actually closing the distance. The moment I saw shoulders shifting between the reeds, I let go of both suitcases. They fell sideways into the dirt with a dull, padded thud, and for a second, I watched them roll, almost stupidly, as if my brain refused to accept that I was abandoning what little I owned. But my legs were already moving before the sound even settled. The backpack slammed against my spine with each step. I pulled the straps tight, kept my head low, and ran along the narrow dirt track cut between the reeds. The ground was soft, uneven, and each footfall sent a muted vibration through the soil. Behind me, those vibrations were louder, more feet, heavier weight, the rhythm of multiple bodies moving without hesitation. I didn't look back. The path bent slightly to the right, where the reeds grew taller, thick enough that the wind barely pushed them. I moved into them sideways, pushing the stalks apart with my arms, letting the sharp edges drag across my sleeves. The moment I crouched low, the sounds changed. My breathing was too loud, so I pressed my lips together and drew air slowly through my nose. The reeds trembled around me, my own movements, but also something else. Something brushing through the stalks several meters behind. A short burst of muffled laughter. A few syllables I couldn't place. Not English. Not anything familiar. The ground dipped slightly, and I lowered myself further. Until the mud touched the back of my hand, I stayed still. The noises pressed against the edges of the field. Footsteps dragging, a shoe catching on a rock, a whisper that might have been a name or nothing at all. The men weren't talking to me. They were talking to each other, in short bursts, as if coordinating movement. I pressed my forehead against my knees and listened. A single reed snapped a few feet behind me. The sound was delicate, almost insignificant, but out in that field it felt amplified, then another, closer, then a longer scrape, something like a sole sliding on dry dirt. I tilted my head slowly, making as little noise as possible, and through the narrow gap of reeds I saw a leg move past a worn boot, dark fabric above it. It stopped for a moment, angled slightly as if the man was turning his head. Then he kept going. I didn't lift my head. I stayed folded in on myself, counting his steps until the sound dissolved into the ambient hush of the field. But another set of steps came from the opposite direction. This time the ground vibrated differently, lighter weight, but quicker. Whoever it was pushed through the reeds impatiently. I heard another laugh, tense and short. It carried the kind of sharpness that didn't belong to someone relaxed or bored. It was the laugh of someone who thought he was close to something. I pressed myself flat to the dirt until my chest touched the ground. Mud soaked into the front of my clothes. My palms picked up grit and shredded leaves. I didn't wipe them. The footsteps halted somewhere behind me. Reeds shifted. A few were pushed forward, their tips bending over my head. I held my breath until the pressure in my ribs felt like something cracking inside. Then the footsteps returned to movement, slower this time, as if sweeping the area. I didn't hear him leaving. I heard him blending into the rest of the field, his noise becoming part of everything else, brushing and scraping in that endless dark time blurred after that. I don't know how long I crouched there, only that my legs went numb and my hands trembled uncontrollably. The backpack strap dug into my shoulder until it felt like a wire cutting skin, and the air grew heavier as the temperature dropped. Eventually, the field settled. Not silent, just settled. The laughter faded. The unintelligible voices drifted farther away. The reeds stopped swaying. When I finally moved, it wasn't because I felt safe. It was because staying there any longer meant I wouldn't be able to stand at all. I pushed myself up, one palm at a time, forcing circulation back into my legs until pins and needles shot upward in waves. I kept my phone in my pocket. My hand brushed the screen, and for a moment I imagined the glow revealing me like a flare. I didn't turn it on. I knew exactly how far the light would carry out here. I didn't need them turning back. I stepped out of the reeds and onto the dirt track again, moving faster than walking, but slower than running. A careful, tense pace that let me listen as much as I moved. The path seemed darker than before, as if the field had swallowed more of the remaining daylight. I followed the faintest hint of the trail, a slightly pressed line through the ground, until the reeds thinned and the landscape opened again. Only then did I take out the phone. The screen glowed painfully in the dark, my thumb hovering over the map app, and for a second the field behind me felt like it leaned forward, as if listening for the sound. I checked the map as quickly as I could. The blue dot was still there. The route was still there. The end point, the hostel, still pulsed faintly on the map, as if everything was normal. The problem is that the map showed a straight, simple path. But what lay ahead of me didn't resemble any road I'd ever taken. The dirt track turned into something narrower, something that wasn't even a trail anymore, just a suggestion of flattened grass. Winding deeper into the dark, I kept going. Every few steps I glanced back, checking the field, the horizon, the silhouettes that might have been trees or might have been something else. Nothing moved, but the quiet felt wrong, like the field hadn't let me go. Not fully, like something was still adjusting its shape behind me, waiting for another chance. The ground sloped upward, then dipped sharply, and for a moment I lost my balance. The backpack pulled me backward, my feet sliding on dry dirt, and I grabbed at the air before steadying myself. That was when I saw it. Far ahead, past the last row of reeds, past the ditch that cut through the land like an old scar, a shape interrupted the horizon rectangular, tall enough to catch what little moonlight was left, too still to be a tree. I blinked hard, adjusting my eyes. The silhouette didn't move, it didn't flicker. It didn't shift with the wind. It was a building, exactly where the map said it would be. But nothing around it resembled the photos from the booking page. No road, no lights, no other structures. Just one building rising out of the field, as if someone had dropped it there and walked away decades ago. The map insisted it existed. Everything else told me it shouldn't. So I kept walking toward it, one careful step at a time, trying not to think about what waited inside, only knowing that the field behind me wasn't finished with me yet. And when I finally reached the front steps, mud still drying on my palms, I put my hand on the door and realized something was wrong with the way the interior felt through the wood, like the space behind it wasn't shaped the way a normal hallway should be. That's when I pushed it open. The door didn't resist the way it should have. A building that old should have swollen wood, rusted hinges, a heavy frame that groaned when pushed. But the panel moved too lightly, almost as if someone had been opening and closing it often. The air inside greeted me with a stillness that felt manufactured, not the natural stillness of an abandoned structure, but an intentional quiet, as if the building itself was waiting. My phone stayed in my pocket. I didn't dare let any light spill out. What little moonlight followed me through the doorway settled along a long, narrow hallway. The photos on the booking app showed clean walls painted in soft colors, a modern reception desk, bright windows. This place was nothing like that. The walls were discolored, stained in long lines that suggested leaks or years of dampness. Paint had peeled into thin curls that clung to the edges of the baseboards. The floorboards were uneven and warped, bending under their own age. Everything about the place looked 20, maybe 30 years older than the version I had seen online. No front desk, no lamps, no signs, no welcome, just a hallway that seemed too long for a two-story building. I closed the door behind me. It didn't latch properly. The frame didn't fit right, as if the door belonged to a different structure. I moved deeper inside, keeping one hand on the backpack strap and the other along the wall. The air smelled faintly of old fabric, clean but stale. There was no dust floating in the beam of moonlight, slipping through the window at the end of the hall. That detail bothered me more than anything. I had expected cobwebs, thick dust on the floor, maybe even debris from years of neglect. Instead, the hallway was too clean, too swept, too tended in a way that didn't fit the age of the building. Someone had been here recently. Someone who didn't want the place to look abandoned. I reached the first door on my left. The handle was cold. I turned it slowly, letting the mechanism click as lightly as possible. Inside, 4 beds. 4 identical metal frames, each with a thin mattress and a neatly folded blanket. No personal belongings, no bags, no shoes, just beds arranged with the precision of a dormitory no one had checked into. The air didn't move. I closed the door and moved to the next. Same layout, same beds, same blankets pulled tight at the corners. The pillows had no dust, no indentation, no sign that anyone had rested their head there in weeks or months. It was as though someone cleaned these rooms every day, but no one slept in them. I checked a few more, always the same. The further I went, the stronger the sense grew that I shouldn't be here, not because of anything supernatural, but because this building felt curated, arranged, kept in a state that wasn't for guests, but for something else entirely. I crossed to the hallway on the opposite side, following a faint draft. This hall felt different, wider, with doors spaced unevenly, as if the building had been modified over time. The first door I opened revealed a room with two bunk beds, their frames bolted directly into the walls. The mattresses had clean sheets. The blankets were tucked under with hospital precision. It was the only room that looked remotely usable. I stepped inside, listened, then quietly closed the door. The lock was a simple turnstile mechanism, cheap, barely functional, but it turned, and the bolt slid into place with a soft, metallic tap. I climbed to the upper bunk, keeping my backpack on the mattress beside me. The foam creaked slightly under my weight. The ceiling was low enough that I could touch it with my fingertips. The air felt thinner here, less circulation, more insulation, as if the building held its breath. I pressed the blanket over my legs and waited. My pulse thudded inside my throat. The building shifted subtly, wood expanding or contracting in the cold night air. A faint vibration moved through the wall behind the bed, as if pipes were settling or someone walked somewhere far below, but nothing definite. I let my breathing slow. Then the sound came, a soft, unmistakable creak from the far end of the hallway, not the settling of old wood, a footstep and another. Slow, even, measured. Someone walking with deliberate weight, heel to toe, heel to toe. Each step created a subtle pressure change in the floorboards, a hollow resonance that traveled through the length of the hallway and into the frame of my bed. I held my breath. Another step. Then a soft scrape, like a shoe turning slightly. Then the first door opened. Not wide, just a test, a push, the gentle squeal of hinges, the door closed. Then the next door opened. And the next. Someone was checking every room. No words, no coughs, no frustrated breath, only the quiet sequence of handle turning, hinges shifting, and door meeting frame again. My fingers tightened around the edge of the bunk. The mattress dipped under my grip. I leaned forward slightly, listening for any irregularity in the pattern. A hint of speed, a drag of a foot, anything that revealed intention. But the footsteps remained steady. The person wasn't searching in a panic. They were checking with purpose, like someone verifying which rooms were empty, which ones weren't supposed to be. The sound moved closer. A door 2 rooms away opened, then closed. The floorboard just outside my door creaked. A slow compression followed by a soft release. I watched the shadow beneath the gap. A pair of shapes. Feet, angled toward my door. They didn't move. They didn't shift. They simply stood there, as though listening. The handle turned. I pressed my back against the wall and braced myself. The lock should have held. It should have resisted. It was the only barrier between me and whoever stood inches away on the other side. But the bolt slid out of the latch with almost no pressure. The door opened quietly, effortlessly, as if the lock had never been engaged at all. Moonlight from the hallway stretched across the floor, exposing the dustless boards, the lower bunk, the legs of the metal frame. The shadow of the person entered, long, steady, belonging to someone who didn't hesitate. They didn't speak. They didn't leave. They stepped fully inside the room. And behind them, from the hallway, more footsteps followed. Not one person, several. The floor trembled slightly under the weight. The door began to close again. The door didn't close all at once. It eased shut, slowly, quietly, as if the person holding it wanted to make sure it wouldn't make noise. For a second, the hallway's dim gray light hovered along the floor. Then the latch touched the frame, sealing us in with nothing but the faint smell of metal, stale fabric, and boots that had walked through the field. I stayed curled in the upper bunk, my knees pulled to my chest, one hand gripping the backpack straps. My fingers were numb from holding still too long. The blanket covered everything except the smallest gap near my eyes. Through that slit, I watched the shadows of the men shift as they stepped further into the room. None of them looked up. One man set something on the floor. A plastic bag, thin, crinkled, the kind used at small markets. Another dropped a bottle. The glass tapped the floorboard with a dull ring before settling. Someone else kicked the bottle lightly, as if adjusting its position. The sound echoed under the bunk frames. They sat down, 5 or 6 of them, settling on the wooden planks in a loose circle, cross-legged, relaxed, too comfortable in a place where no one else should have been. Then a small pinpoint of light appeared. A click, a lantern switching on. Not a flashlight. An old camping lantern with a warm bulb that pushed soft yellow light around the room. The shadows retreated instantly, revealing worn jackets, mud-streaked pants, and shoes that had been dampened by the field. None of the men looked up at me, but they didn't need to. The brightness climbed the walls, reached the ceiling, and spread under the bunk enough that any movement from me would have been obvious. I pressed the blanket tighter around my face. Their voices started low. Not a language I recognized. No English, no Spanish, no German, no Asian cadence, a mix of throaty consonants and clipped vowels, spoken quickly in short, sharp bursts. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they argued quietly, sometimes they spoke in what sounded like names or numbers. One of them pulled food out of another bag. The smell was strong, fermented, acidic, unfamiliar. They ate with their hands, dropping pieces onto the floor when something slipped. A second bag rustled open. Glass clinked. A cork or cap rolled, tapping against the baseboard before disappearing into the shadows under the lower bed. The plastic bags moved. A wrapper tore. A bottle was handed from one man to another. None of them looked up, but they didn't need to. They had taken the entire room as theirs. The lantern's glow settled on the floor directly beneath my bunk, illuminating details I wish I didn't see. Dirt trailing from their shoes, dark stains on the wood, and the edges of rope fibers sticking out from one of the bags they brought. Thin rope, frayed at the ends, the kind used to tie down cargo or... I didn't finish the thought. I kept still. Hours passed, though I didn't know how many times, stretched into a slow, suffocating rhythm of breathing through fabric, adjusting my weight silently and listening to the cadence of their voices. My legs cramped, my throat burned, sweat collected at the back of my neck, trapped by the blanket. There was one moment when I almost shifted my weight without thinking, and that's when I heard it. A soft scrape on metal. The ladder leading up to my bunk. Someone was climbing. I froze. My body locked in place so completely that my lungs stopped mid-breath. The blanket stuck slightly to the sweat on my face, sealing me in darkness. The ladder creaked again. Another step. Metal bending slightly under weight. Then the sound of fabric moving. Someone settling onto the opposite top bunk. The bed across from mine dipped, the frame giving a low groan. I saw the shadow of his movement reflected faintly on the ceiling. He lay on his side, facing my direction. If I moved even a little, even exhaled too loudly, his eyes would be inches from mine. I listened for breathing. It came slowly, evenly. He wasn't asleep. He was awake, waiting for something. My hand stayed locked around the backpack strap. Every muscle trembled from the effort of staying still. I couldn't wipe the sweat from my forehead or adjust the blanket. If I moved, even the slightest shift of fabric would be visible. Minutes, or maybe hours later, the man below me laughed. Another poured more alcohol. Something clattered against the frame of the lower bunk. The air thickened with the smell of liquor and something metallic. The men didn't leave, they didn't fall asleep, they just stayed, talking, eating, waiting. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. I pressed my fingers against my chest, trying to feel my heartbeat through the fabric, worried its rhythm was loud enough to hear. Eventually, the man on the opposite bunk moved slightly, not to stand, just to shift positions. A quiet rustle of fabric, enough for me to see the outline of his shoulder, his elbow, the angle of his head turned toward me. If I had lifted the blanket even a few inches, our eyes would have met. I held completely still. My legs throbbed from staying curled for too long. My toes had gone numb. My fingertips tingled from blood, pooling in the wrong places, but I didn't adjust. Not even once. At some point, late into the night, the voices below dimmed. Not quiet, but lower. Muttered. Slurred. Then irregular, like someone fighting sleep after too much alcohol. No one fully slept. I could tell by the way their breathing shifted, never deep, never steady. They hovered in a half-conscious place, the kind of unsteady rest that could break at any sudden noise. Even worse was the man on the opposite bunk. He didn't snore. He didn't shift. He just breathed slowly, occasionally exhaling through his nose in a faint, deliberate sound. I didn't know if he was asleep. I didn't know if he was pretending, but I knew I couldn't stay where I was. The longer I waited, the less chance I had of getting out before dawn, and before they fully woke. So I decided. I moved one finger first, just one, testing the air, testing the frame, testing whether any sound followed. Nothing did. I let my hand travel slowly to the backpack strap. My grip tightened. I pulled the bag toward me millimeter by millimeter. The fabric made the faintest whisper, nearly masked by the soft snoring below. I shifted my weight. The mattress creaked, a tiny sound, almost imaginary. I stopped instantly. No reaction. I continued. It took nearly 5 minutes just to rotate my hips, enough to uncurl my legs, another few minutes to angle my feet toward the ladder without letting the blanket slide off. I lowered one foot. It hovered above the ladder's first rung for a long moment, then touched the metal with the gentlest pressure I could manage. A soft vibration traveled through the frame. No one reacted. I placed the second foot. Then I began descending, one rung at a time, so slowly that my muscles trembled from holding each position for too long. The ladder clicked once. When my heel brushed a bolt, I froze. Someone below shifted. A hand dragged lightly across the floor. A bottle rolled a few inches before stopping. Then, silence again. When the soles of my feet finally touched the floor, I paused, adjusting to the bright circle of lantern light bathing the center of the room. The men sat around it, some leaning back on their elbows, some slumped forward. Their eyes were half-lidded, but none were fully unconscious. The floor was a minefield. Bottles, food scraps, crumpled paper, broken caps, plastic, tangled rope fibers. One wrong step would create noise. I lifted my backpack, holding it against my chest so the zippers wouldn't rattle. My eyes moved to the door. The space between me and escape was only a few steps. But each step had to be perfect. I stepped forward, heel barely touching the ground, foot gliding more than landing, avoiding bottlenecks and broken bits of glass, avoiding the dark stain I didn't want to identify. The room felt tighter with each inch, air heavy enough to taste. I reached the door frame. That's when I saw the bag sitting beside it, one I hadn't noticed when I entered. The top was open. Inside were items I recognized instantly, even in dim light. Coils of rope, a roll of silver tape, a utility blade with a broken tip, a pair of gloves, something that looked like cloth strips, bundled tightly as if prepared ahead of time. Tools without context, but the context didn't need to be spelled out. I kept my eyes on the door. My hand closed around the knob as slowly as I had climbed the ladder. The metal was warm from the lantern's heat. I turned it. The latch disengaged without sound. And when I pushed the door open, the hallway's cold air slid across my face. A sharp contrast to the thick, stale atmosphere behind me I stepped through. The door drifted closed without a click, and as soon as it sealed, I ran. Not down the hallway yet, just away from that room, away from the circle of lantern light, away from the breathing of men who never should have been there. By the time I reached the stairs, I could already feel that something had changed outside. A shift in air, in temperature, in the sound of the night beyond the walls. When I stepped out of the building, the field didn't look like the same place I had walked through before. The cold hit my feet first. The floorboards on the stairwell were sharper than I expected, splinters lifting, edges rough, each step sending a thin sting through the soles of my feet. As I descended, I barely registered it. My only thought was distance. How many steps? How many seconds? How many breaths I needed before I reached the ground floor? The stairwell was darker than the hallway upstairs. The moonlight didn't reach here. Only a faint gray sliver rested along the edges of the steps. Not enough to see, but enough to follow. I moved fast but quiet, my weight distributed across the edges of my feet, so the old wood wouldn't creak. Every sound from the room above still echoed faintly. Shuffled breathing, a distant clink of glass, a shifting frame. Nothing that suggested they were aware I had left. When I reached the bottom, the final step groaned under me. A single long sound that seemed too loud in the stale air. I waited, listened. No footsteps followed. I opened the door leading outside. This time it didn't resist at all. The looseness of the hinges made it swing open too lightly, almost weightless, as if the door had been opened many times this night already. The air outside was colder than before. The fields, which earlier had been dim and wide, now looked altered, like the night had stretched them farther, pulled them deeper, shifted the landmarks into unfamiliar shapes. The grass near the building's entrance was flattened in several places. Heavy foot traffic, boot prints facing inward, as if many people had stood there, waiting for someone to come out, waiting for me. My breathing steadied out of necessity, not calm. The edges of the field were darker here, shapes blending together, the horizon barely visible. I scanned the path I had taken earlier, tracing it with memory rather than sight. That's when I saw them. My 2 suitcases. I had dropped them hours earlier, thinking the weight slowed me down too much. I remembered exactly where I abandoned them, separate from each other, one near the tall reeds, the other closer to the narrow dirt trail. But now they were together, placed side by side, as if someone had retrieved them, carried them, and arranged them neatly in the open. Around them, footprints, not 2 or 3, a cluster. Shoes, boots, overlapping marks, deep impressions in every direction. Some prints circled the luggage. Some faced the building. Some faced the fields where I now stood. I didn't approach. I didn't check the bags. I didn't try to reclaim anything I had left behind. I simply adjusted my backpack on my shoulders and stepped back. It was clear the luggage had never been the point. Only me. The men from the building had waited, had expected me to return for the suitcases, had placed them together like bait. I stepped away from them and toward the faint outline of the main road. The field was quieter now. No insects, no distant wind. Only the faint crunch of dry grass under my feet and my own breath shaping the cold air. I kept my phone off until I reached the broken fence along the edge of the property. Only there, half hidden behind a dead shrub, did I turn it on. The screen lit my hands with an artificial glow. No messages, no service errors, nothing unusual. Just the map. The dot representing me floated alone in the middle of a blank portion of land. No buildings labeled, no hostel marked, no path leading back. The place I had fled didn't exist on the screen. I zoomed in, out, reloaded, nothing. The building that had nearly trapped me wasn't registered in any layer of the map. I stepped onto the narrow asphalt strip that passed for a road and requested a ride through the app. The driver accepted immediately, too quickly, but I didn't question it. Anything that would get me out of the fields was enough. Headlights appeared 10 minutes later, cutting through the dimness. I flagged the car, stepping into the open. The driver rolled down the window, leaning out slightly in confusion. "You came from back there?" he asked. I nodded once. He stared past me toward the fields, the darkness swallowing everything behind my silhouette. His expression shifted, recognition, hesitation, something like discomfort. "That building's closed," he said. "Has been for years." I didn't answer. "They say someone bought it a long time ago. Never opened it. Locals don't go near it." He paused, trying to measure my reaction. "They also say people disappear there sometimes. Travelers, especially." His eyes moved to my bare feet. "You shouldn't be walking around here alone." I got into the car. He didn't speak again until we were several kilometers away. I stayed one night in the next city, a proper guest house with bright hallways and working locks. In the morning, I told one of the staff members what had happened. She didn't seem surprised. "That place wasn't built as a hostel," she said. "It was used by a group a long time ago, not officially. They would lure people off the main road." "Lure how?" I asked. "With false listings, cheap rates, clean photos. Foreigners always fell for it." She shrugged. "Locals don't book places like that." I asked why the listing was still online. She didn't even look up from the counter. "Because someone keeps putting it back up." Week persists. I traveled through other cities, train stations, airports, crowded bus terminals. Every new location added distance between me and that field, that building, that room full of men who didn't belong in any official lodging. But distance didn't erase details. Not the bunk frame, not the lantern, not the sound of someone climbing into the bed across from mine, not the suitcase footprints circled like an invitation. I didn't talk about it again. Not to other travelers, not to guides, not to anyone. But one night, in another country, another hotel, I opened the booking app again, just to check. Out of habit, out of something nameless, I scrolled through recommendations, then searches, then the map view. And then I saw it. The listing: same photos, same price, same high rating, and the same name. The hostel that shouldn't exist. The one I had escaped. The one that wasn't on the map until it needed to be. I closed the app and kept traveling. How was the story? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. I'll return with the next horror story soon.